we want to talk to Mr. Scavino and Mr. Navarro about their roles in the attempt to overturn an election. The American people didn't pay their salaries to do that.
Peter Navarro was the White House trade advisor. It was not within his job description to overthrow presidential elections.
The Department of Justice has a duty to act on this referral and others we have sent. Without enforcement of congressional subpoenas, there is no oversight.
Democracy only survives if citizens are willing to defend it.
Tonight, the January 6th committee voted in favor of recommending criminal contempt charges for former Trump aides Dan Scavino and Peter Navarro. The full House will now vote on whether to send those recommendations to the Justice Department. It comes as a judge presiding over a civil suit involving the committee found then-President Trump likely attempted to obstruct the joint session of Congress on January 6th, which would indeed be a crime. Meanwhile, three sources tell NBC News Jared Kushner, the former president's son-in-law, scheduled to appear before the Select Committee on Thursday. So let's discuss. With us tonight, Katie Benner, Justice Department reporter for The New York Times, and Chuck Rosenberg, former U.S. attorney and former senior FBI official. Chuck, this sounds very serious, but the issue is, what's the holdup at the Department of Justice? We haven't seen any action on Mark Meadows. Could we see the same thing with Scavino and Navarro?
Yeah, you might very well see nothing, Stephanie. You might see no action at all. And I don't think there's a problem at the Department of Justice. I think they're making an independent judgment about whether the law and the facts merit prosecution. Even if you don't like the claims of privilege that they are putting forward, they, Scavino and Meadows and the like, that doesn't mean it doesn't have some sticking power. And it may mean that the Department of Justice simply doesn't believe that they can win a conviction at trial with the assertion of privilege. And so I'm not surprised that we haven't seen an indictment of Meadows yet. I am not surprised we did see an indictment of Bannon. Very different cases. And I think the new referrals that we may see soon, Scavino and Navarro, are more like the Meadows case and less like the Bannon case.
Why? Why?
Yeah, well, simply, Bannon did not work for the president. He wasn't in government. And so his conversations with Trump are not covered by any sort of privilege. Moreover, Bannon simply stonewalled the committee. He didn't cooperate at all. Meadows cooperated to an extent, and then he stopped. Navarro and Scavino, like Meadows, worked for the president, worked in the White House, and were arguably, and I'm not saying I believe it's a strong claim, but arguably had their conversations with the president covered by a claim of executive privilege. So they are different than Bannon. It makes sense to me that Bannon would be charged. It makes sense to me that the other three may not be.
Well, those charges don't seem to be impacting him, Katie, because while Bannon was charged by the Department of Justice with criminal contempt, he's still out there trucking, pushing his narratives on his podcast and out there to right-wing media. So did any of these guys care about the charges? Because when I look at Steve Bannon, he just looks at all of this as free press.
So that's the result of a choice made by the committee to file criminal charges, criminal contempt. If they'd gone for civil action, then that would be different. They could do things like actually get documents, document production, and possibly even some sort of testimony, even if it was just people pleading the fifth. With the choice to pursue criminal contempt, that means that the people who they are, hope the Justice Department will charge, they get to do things like go through a fair trial. So this lasts a lot longer. And in the meantime, you're right, Steve Bannon can say and do as he pleases, knowing that it could impact him later at trial. But again, the consequences themselves are not so steep that he might not risk a fine of $100,000 or jail time.
All right, well, then let's talk about a civil case, Chuck, because a federal judge in a civil case today wrote that Trump and his lawyer, John Eastman, quote, launched a campaign to overturn a Democratic election, an action unprecedented in American history. It was a coup in search of a legal theory. Now, that is a federal judge suggesting Trump committed a crime. People are obviously going wild over it. But is it actually going to impact what the Justice Department does or Donald Trump in any real way?
I don't think so. Let me tell you why, Stephanie. What the judge wrote in that civil case in Los Angeles is interesting and it's compelling. but it's not evidence. A federal prosecutor can't take the judge's order and submit it in evidence in a criminal trial against anybody. A federal prosecutor can't call the judge as a witness. The judge has no firsthand knowledge. So it's interesting, it's compelling, but it's not evidence. And so therefore, I don't think it materially changes how the Department of Justice views the case. The Department of Justice already understands that theory. Its prosecutors understand what the judge understands. If they want to charge somebody with trying to obstruct Congress, then they need admissible evidence. And that order ain't it.
All right, Katie, the committee also met tonight to discuss bringing in Ginny Thomas after her text messages were publicly revealed. Of course, this is the wife of Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas. They haven't made a decision on that yet. What is the holdup? Why wouldn't they? They don't have a limit on the number of people they could bring in. And those text messages, they're unbelievable.
Well, I think that one reason the committee might want to pause is because it's clear that Ginny Thomas was very prolific in her messaging of a variety of people, including reaching out to Mark Meadows and others close to Trump. Would it be better to wait to see how much information they can get, how many text messages they can get that Ginny Thomas may have sent before calling her in? She's going to be a hard witness to get, and she's going to be a hard person to question. It might be better for them to first gather as much evidence as they possibly can. And I wanted to address one thing that in your previous question to Chuck, while the Eastman court filing may not impact what the Justice Department does, it completely and perfectly highlights the conundrum for the Justice Department that's way bigger than whether or not they bring Trump to criminal trial. It is the fact that you have a judge now, you have people in public, you have lawmakers, you have a lot of people saying that Trump committed a crime in broad daylight. He undermined the rule of law. That is the accusation. And if the Justice Department's job is to uphold that, if they feel that they can't, then you are talking about a larger question for the department for democracy and the rule of law.
Then, Chuck, help us understand what you believe the committee is trying to do, because I want to go back to Navarro, Scavino, Mark Meadows, trying to get them to comply. They're not going to, right? This is the Trump loyalist trio. They're not going to play ball. So what is the committee trying to do?
You know, this is what Katie touched on earlier, and she was exactly right. There's a difference between civil contempt, Stephanie, trying to get someone to comply, and that's not what the committee is seeking here, and criminal contempt, punishing someone for failing to comply. They're not going to play ball here, and so the committee is hoping that the Department of Justice will punish these four men for failing to comply. But the committee is not going to get any additional information. There are times when folks are held in civil contempt. Maybe they're fined $10,000 a day as an incentive to comply. You're not seeing that here. And I don't believe that you're going to see additional criminal contempt prosecutions, at least not of the two that are now being recommended, and Mr. Meadows, whose case has already been referred. By the way, one additional point, Stephanie, the Department of Justice doesn't need referrals in order to prosecute someone. And sometimes I worry that it could have a counterproductive effect, meaning if the Department of Justice, which always should play it down the middle, gets a referral from a committee and then from a mostly partisan vote in the full House to prosecute someone, it may have the opposite effect. It may be exactly the kind of case you don't want to prosecute because it originated in a partisan referral.
All right, before we go, Katie, Jared Kushner going to testify to the committee on Thursday. How important is that?
Well, it is important because we've seen time and again in different parts of testimony and in different documents produced by the committee that people reached out to Jared Kushner in a variety of ways at a variety of times, including Ginny Thomas, trying to convince him and others that something should be done to overturn the election. So it's going to be interesting to see what Jared says to the committee. I think that he is incentivized to, in as much as he can, try to protect his own reputation. I really cannot imagine a scenario in which he would say anything that would incriminate his father-in-law. But at the same time, he's going to need to thread a very difficult needle because he's going to want to come across to the committee as somebody who's forthcoming and honest, who believes in democracy and the rule of law. He's a young person with a long career ahead of him, but at the same time, he is part of the Trump loyalty camp. And so it will be interesting to see how he plays that testimony.
Will we get to see it, or is it private?
it'll be private. But so many of the depositions have come out. The depositions have come out in many ways. They've come out in court filings when the committee has said, we're suing Dan, we want to hold Dan Scavino in contempt. And so they will say, we found this evidence or this piece of evidence. There are ways in which the depositions have been made public. And we know that there's going to be a final report, which will probably include the depositions in the appendices.